The lantern had burned low all winter, a soft flame against the wind that scratched at the windows and moaned down the chimney like it missed someone. Donna May Caldwell never let it die. She'd trimmed its wick every dusk for nearly a decade, even when there was no one to see it. Especially then. Her cabin stood alone at the edge of Black Juniper Ridge, stubborn, slouched, and wind-worn. The nearby townfolk called it Widow's Watch, though no widow was ever declared. Donna had never worn a veil, never held a folded telegram, never stood at a grave. But she had waited once, and when no one came back, she stopped waiting. Left the church, left the parlor. Let the vines overtake the gate, the dust cover her name. Now she fed chickens, chopped wood, and talked only to her dog, Boz, a half-deaf shepherd with a crooked paw and one cloudy eye. She could read the sky better than any almanac. She knew when the frost would snap bones and when the snow would let up just long enough to carry water from the creek. She lived not quite afraid, but always alert. Like the land might shift beneath her boots if she stopped listening. That morning, the air felt wrong. It was still, too still. Not a crow stirred, not a squirrel chattered. Even the frost on the window panes seemed to hold its breath. Donna stepped out with her shotgun tucked in the crook of her arm and scanned the horizon. Dust rolled gently on the east trail, rising like a question. 5 riders. They were far yet, but already she could tell Apache. Tall, bare-backed ponies. No flags, no drums, just presence. Men who carried their silence like weapons. No hurry in their pace. They rode like they had nowhere else to be. Donna didn't run. She stepped back inside, set the kettle to boil, and pulled on her boots. The shotgun she left by the door. Loaded, but still. She wasn't a fool, and she wasn't a coward. That was what her father used to say when patching fence in the dark: don't be a fool, and don't be a coward. The land knows the difference. By the time the 5 arrived, the sky had shifted. Gray-blue, low with clouds, smelling faintly of snow. Boz barked once, then went quiet, ears pinned. The lead rider was older, his face carved by time, hair streaks silver and tied back. Behind him, 4 others. Broad-shouldered. Scars on their arms, beaded braids, the sharp glint of bone-handled knives at their hips. One dismounted. Taller than the others. Younger, maybe 30. A jagged line of scar tissue ran from his temple to his jaw, a seam of old pain. He walked to the porch slowly, boots quiet against the thawing ground. Donna opened the door before he knocked. "There's one bed," she said. "But the floor near the fire's warm." No one moved for a long breath. Then the tall one dipped his head in a slow, deliberate nod. Not thanks, not apology. Just understanding. They entered like smoke, silent, shifting, part of the room before you realized. They removed nothing, coats, boots, weapons stayed on, but they did not touch anything. Donna poured tea into her chipped enamel cups and passed them out. None refused. Boz sat curled by the fire, one eye open, unmoving. Night came down fast, as it always did in the mountains. They didn't ask her name, and she didn't ask theirs. But she noticed things. The eldest carried a string of tobacco pouches at his hip and never blinked at the kettle's hiss. Another man, barely more than a boy, traced patterns in the ash near the hearth like he was remembering something. The tall one, is scarred and quiet, watched her hands when she chopped onions, when she set the stew on the coals. Not in hunger. In study. They ate. Sparingly. Left half their bread untouched. One of them, the boy, placed a pinecone gently on the windowsill before sleep. Donna didn't move it. She didn't know if it was a warning or a blessing, and something in her didn't want to find out. She didn't sleep, not fully. Lay in bed with her boots on, the lantern low, her thoughts circling the crackling of the fire and the whisper of wind outside. Boz growled once, but softly, like he didn't want to wake her unless he had to. In the morning, the men were still there. One was chopping wood. Another swept the porch with a fallen branch. Donna blinked hard at the sight. It had been years since anyone touched her broom but her. It stirred something strange in her chest. Not warmth. Not quite. Later that day, she caught the tall one staring at a small framed photo on her shelf. Her mother, in a white dress. Donna didn't speak. He didn't touch the frame, just looked. Then nodded once again. The same nod as before. The same unspoken language. She didn't know why they came. She didn't know if they were running or resting or something in between. But they didn't harm, didn't take, didn't speak beyond what the eyes could hold. It unnerved her. It steadied her. On the third night, as snow began to fall gentle and fat over the cabin roof, Donna lit the lantern and left it on the porch. Just in case someone else came. Just in case someone was still looking for light. The fire crackled, and Red Bear, that was the name she finally heard from the old one, sat near her as she mended a wool sock. He didn't speak, but his presence wasn't empty. It was full of restraint. Of storms held back. When she looked up, she found him watching her hands again. "What is it?" she asked. He paused. Then said, in a voice deep and slow like a far canyon echo, "Your hands remember." She didn't reply. Her hands stilled. Then continued stitching. Boz let out a sigh and rolled over. Outside, the wind rose like it had words to say. Inside, no one answered. But Donna didn't feel alone. Not entirely. And for the first time in years, she blew the lantern out before bed. The snow didn't stay. By the third morning, it had melted into wet patches across the earth, soaking into the roots, pooling at the edges of wagon ruts long forgotten. Donna May stepped out early with her hands tucked into her shawl, the cold biting through her worn boots. She found one of the Apache men, Willow Teeth, they called him, sitting on her porch rail, carving something from a block of cedar. His dark eyes flicked to hers but held no greeting, just acknowledgement, as if to say, "We're both awake, and that's enough." She didn't ask when they planned to leave. They didn't ask how long they could stay. The arrangement unfolded like music played by ear, wordless, instinctive. The men gathered water from the creek without being told. They split logs, careful not to disturb her storage pile. Red Bear tended her garden beds, clearing winter debris with patience, moving soil with his broad, scarred hands like he understood its memory. Donna didn't ask questions, but she watched. Red Bear never entered her room, never sat at her table unless she gestured. Yet every morning, her chores were lighter, and every evening, her cabin breathed quieter, as if their presence filled a hollow it hadn't admitted to. They were a quiet storm, coiled, respectful, but always aware. Donna could feel it in their shoulders, the way their backs never touched walls. They didn't sleep deeply. At night, when the fire dimmed, she could hear them shifting, murmuring in low tones like prayers or warnings. Boz adjusted too. At first suspicious, now content to sleep near rising dust, whose knuckles he licked one afternoon without reason. She waited for fear to find her again, to wake in sweat or trembling. But fear had slipped out somehow, like a guest that overstayed and didn't say goodbye. Still, the quiet brought its own weight. The townsfolk would notice. They always did. On the fifth day, just as she was scrubbing a pot in the icy trough, she heard the clatter of hooves. 2 riders from Dry Bluff trotted up the rise, Sheriff Mather and a man she didn't recognize, broad-shouldered and flushed from drink even in the cold. The men didn't dismount. "Morning, Miss Caldwell," the sheriff said, voice too loud for the stillness. His eyes drifted to the Apache men standing in the yard, every one of them silent, unmoved. "Saw some unfamiliar tracks leadin' out this way." Donna dried her hands on her skirt, heart thudding slow and heavy. "I've had visitors." The stranger chuckled. "You sure have." Sheriff Mather tilted his hat back. "You know there's been rumors, Donna. Folks say you've got warriors hidin' here. Dangerous sort." "I've got no one hidden," she replied evenly. "If they wanted to be hidden, you wouldn't have seen them." Willow Teeth smirked at that. The older one, Ghost Elk, stepped forward, gaze steady but unarmed. Sheriff Mather shifted in his saddle. "I ain't here to make trouble. Just remind you that the town's unsettled. Things been tense lately. Settlers gone missing south of the ridge." Donna's voice didn't rise. "And what does that have to do with me?" Nothing, unless it starts to. His smile was thin. We all want peace. Just mind your company, is all. They turned their horses. The stranger spat into her yard before they rode off. That evening, Donna didn't speak. She peeled potatoes with her back to the fire. Red Bear stood behind her, not close, not far. They will return, he said. I know. She cut slower. They think I betrayed something, she murmured. Like being kind is treason. Red Bear didn't answer. Instead, he walked outside into the cold dusk, returning minutes later with a piece of weathered wood. Without asking, he began repairing the broken shutter that had swung loose in the wind. Each strike of the hammer was soft, deliberate, like punctuation in a letter he wasn't writing. By the 6th day, the snow returned in fits. Donna made stew and left a second spoon by the fire. Ghost Elk taught Half Moon how to twist rawhide into rope, and Donna caught herself watching Red Bear roll his sleeves without realizing her breath had hitched. She felt seen. Not watched. Seen. At night, she sat beside the fire stitching an old coat. The men spoke softly in Apache, and though she didn't understand the words, she felt the rhythm of trust in them. She had learned to survive silence, but theirs was a silence shared. A silence that held room for her. She found herself speaking one night, not to anyone, just into the air. My father used to say the land remembers what it gives. And what it takes. Red Bear looked up, eyes meeting hers. Do you believe that? He asked. I think the land remembers me. I don't know if it forgives me. There was no answer. Only the fire crackling and the faint sound of wind brushing against the door like an old friend not ready to come in. Days passed. Donna found Red Bear's boots drying by the hearth one morning and paused. It felt domestic. Intimate. A tenderness wrapped in distance. He never crossed boundaries, and yet he was everywhere, folded into the rhythm of her days. Once, she caught him brushing the snow from her father's old wagon wheel, the one she'd leaned against the barn wall. He didn't know it, but that wheel had once carried her mother into town to give birth. Donna hadn't touched it in years. Seeing him near it made her chest ache. That night, she left a tin cup of sweet tea by his place before he sat. He sipped it without a word. But when their eyes met, there was something there. Not promise. Not yearning. Just gentleness. A respect that carried weight. On the 7th morning, Willow Teeth said something to Red Bear in Apache. Donna couldn't catch the words, but the tone was restless. Red Bear replied without looking her way. She sensed it then. They were planning to leave. The thought sat in her stomach like stone. She walked to the barn alone that day, hands trembling as she threw down hay. Boz followed, sensing something, tail tucked low. Inside the barn, she sat against the stall door and stared at the rafters. It wasn't fear she felt. It was the weight of being seen and then unseen. The ache of something beginning just as it was about to end. She didn't cry. But she clenched her fists until the nails bit skin. When she returned, Red Bear stood on the porch, holding something in his hand. A carved pendant, shaped like a coyote under stars. He held it out. Donna took it. Their fingers brushed. The heat startled her more than the cold ever had. What does it mean? She whispered. He hesitated. That you opened your door. She didn't look down at it. She only closed her fingers around the token, pressed it to her chest, and nodded. Later that night, long after the fire dimmed, she walked out onto the porch and sat alone beneath the stars. Boz lay at her feet. The wind came down the ridge, slow and sure. She held the pendant in her palm and whispered, "They took nothing. Not even my silence." The weather turned again, sharp and gray, as if the land itself had grown uncertain. The air smelled of copper and wet stone, like something long buried was rising. Donna May stood with her hand on the porch post, watching Red Bear kneel by the frostbitten garden. His hands moved through the soil as if asking permission. He didn't dig. He cleared. Gently. Quietly. Donna had lived alone long enough to recognize when peace was about to shift. The others had begun speaking in lower voices. Ghost Elk took longer walks to the ridgeline each evening, staring toward the east trail with a furrowed brow. Willowteeth no longer slept in the barn but on the porch, a rifle nearby. Even Boz had started pacing more at night, sniffing at shadows and refusing to settle. Donna didn't ask what they were waiting for. She only kept the kettle filled, the fire stacked, and the table set for 6. One afternoon, as the wind lashed down the ridge like a broken whip, Red Bear stood beside her while she patched the quilt. He didn't speak, but his presence grounded her. Donna found her fingers slowing, her stitches uneven. "I was supposed to marry a man who never came back," she said suddenly, not looking at him. "He left for supplies. Took a cart and never returned. Some say he ran. Some say bandits. Doesn't matter which." Red Bear said nothing. He didn't comfort her. He didn't offer apologies. But after a moment, he picked up the torn edge of the quilt and held it steady so she could stitch. Later that evening, a crow landed on the porch rail, fat and oil-black, eyes too bright. Ghost Elk muttered something under his breath and tossed a pinch of tobacco into the fire. Donna didn't ask. She only took note of how the sky clouded faster afterward. The light dimmed, but the lanterns were not yet lit. By the end of the week, the decision had been made. Ghost Elk, Rising Dust, Half Moon, and Willowteeth packed light. They spoke briefly to Red Bear, words passed like stones across water, weighty but without echo. Red Bear turned to Donna. "I stay. If you allow." She said nothing for a long moment. Then she walked inside and brought out a second blanket, folded neatly, and set it by the hearth. The others left at dawn without farewell. Donna watched them from the porch, arms crossed under her shawl. Boz sat by her feet, tail still. The riders did not look back. She didn't blame them. The West didn't favor long goodbyes. She thought maybe she'd feel relief, less to feed, less to fear. But the silence after they left felt hollower than before they came. Inside, Red Bear chopped wood without being asked. He fixed the barn's rear latch, replaced the broken hinge on the outhouse door, and smoked fish she hadn't caught. He did not ask to stay the night. He simply didn't leave. For the first time in years, Donna set out a tin plate not for duty, but for hope. One night, the moon slipped behind heavy clouds, and the wind carried the scent of pipe smoke from miles away. Donna stood outside in her wool dress, watching the trees bend like they were listening. Red Bear appeared beside her, arms folded. "They will come," he said quietly. "Men from the town. Their fear rides before them." She nodded. "I've felt it." Red Bear looked down. "You do not have to stand between them and us." "I'm not standing between," she said. "I'm standing beside." A crack sounded in the trees. Not gunfire. A branch, perhaps. But Boz barked and then whimpered. Donna stepped off the porch and stared into the woods. There was nothing. That night, she dreamed of footsteps around the house and voices in a language she didn't understand. Not Apache. Not English. Just tones that stung. When she woke, her lantern had gone out. And someone had hung a dead fox from her fence post. It was no warning. It was a claim. She buried the fox at dawn with bare hands. Boz whimpered as he watched, tail curled. Red Bear knelt beside her and placed his knife in the soil, blade down, before lifting it again and slipping it away. Donna didn't flinch. The next day, she rode into Dry Bluff. She hadn't been in nearly a year. The general store went quiet when she entered. Mrs. Sandin, the seamstress, refused to meet her eyes. Mr. Hatch, the man who once offered to fix her fence in exchange for a smile, turned his back and started sweeping an already clean floor. Donna asked for flour. The clerk rang it up without speaking. But as she turned to leave, someone muttered, "Whoring for scalps now, is she?" The room didn't laugh. But no one spoke up either. She walked out slowly, shame burning behind her teeth, even though she felt no guilt. Outside, she passed Sheriff Mather again, leaned on his horse, chewing something dark. He nodded. I warned you. I remember. You still got him in your house? He's not mine to keep. But yes. Sheriff Mather's jaw twitched. Folk are angry. Some say you're giving them a place to plan. She turned fully to him. They're not planning war. They're trying to sleep. He spat. There's no difference anymore. That night, Red Bear didn't ask about her ride. But when she placed the flower on the shelf, she could feel his eyes on her. She turned to face him. They won't forgive me. Even if nothing happened. His voice was low. Then something has happened. She sat by the fire and placed her hands in her lap. When you speak, she said, I feel like I've known silence wrong all these years. Boz shifted in his sleep. Outside, the wind picked up again, faster now. Harder. As if the trees were arguing. That was the night the men came. 6 of them. On horseback. Lanterns swinging. They didn't hide their rifles. Donna stepped out before Red Bear could. You're not welcome here, she said. One of the men, a younger one with a red beard, spat. Neither is he. He's done nothing. His kind don't have to do anything. Just being here is enough. Red Bear stood in the doorway. Not stepping forward. Not retreating. Donna stepped closer to him. You're trespassing, she said. And if you aim to threaten me, you'll need more than fire and names. The man raised his rifle. And Red Bear finally moved. He stepped in front of Donna. Slowly. Deliberately. But he did not draw. He only stared. And the man's hands began to tremble. No words were exchanged. But the moment cracked like glass. The men turned. Slowly. Muttering. Furious. Shamed. When their hooves faded into the trees, Donna let out the breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. Rain started to fall, not heavy, but steady. A soft drizzle that coated everything in silver. Donna looked up. And it struck her how even the sky had gone quiet. Like it couldn't bear to look. The cabin felt larger after they rode away. Ghost elk, willow teeth, rising dust, and half-moon left just after first light, no goodbyes, no words, only the soft jingle of bridles and the hollow rhythm of hooves fading into the hills. The morning mist clung to their backs like ghost smoke. Donna stood on the porch and watched them dissolve into the gray, arms folded tightly beneath her shawl, her breath visible in the chill. Red Bear didn't ride with them. He stood beside her, not asking to stay, not offering to leave. His silence was no longer unfamiliar, it was part of the landscape now, like the crooked pine tree by the well, or the lopsided gate that never quite latched. She turned to go inside. He followed. There were 2 tin plates on the table that night, and only 1 pair of boots drying by the fire. The first evening passed without conversation. Donna stirred the stew until it thickened, dished it into bowls, and passed one to him without looking up. He accepted it the way he always had, with a small nod and steady hands. They ate in rhythm, the kind shared by those who had learned to coexist with grief. Outside, the wind stirred the chimes she'd forgotten were even there. Boz rested between them, belly to the hearth, tail flicking gently as if to say he approved. The following morning, Donna rose before the sun, as she always did, but she found the fire already lit. Red Bear had gone to the creek and returned with water. His shirt was damp with effort, hair pulled back with a strip of deerskin. The kettle sang before she reached for it. They began moving in rhythm, without needing to speak it into being. He repaired the barn roof. She patched his trousers. He brought her a fresh snare line for her trap. She baked cornbread and left the best piece aside for him. No agreement had passed between them. Just continuation. And yet something had shifted. He was no longer a guest. He began carving a small wooden piece each night, a hawk, a rabbit, the face of a sleeping bear, and placing them quietly on the shelf near the fire. Donna didn't ask why. But she began dusting that shelf more often. In the evenings, when the wind outside turned cruel and the sky pressed low, she sat at the window with her knitting and watched the land settle into dusk. Red Bear sat across from her, repairing the leather on his belt, shaping arrows, or simply watching the fire. Sometimes he would glance at her hands, and she felt the warmth crawl up her arms, not from shame, but from something softer. Not longing. Not yet. But something that knew its way there. One day, Donna stepped out with a basket full of dried herbs and found the garden freshly tilled. Not a weed in sight. She blinked at it, unsure how long he'd been working while she slept. He was inside, sipping coffee she didn't remember making for him. "You didn't have to," she said, almost scolding. He didn't look up. "I wanted to." Her chest ached in a strange, unfamiliar way. As if it were remembering how to stretch. She didn't thank him. She only poured a second cup and handed it to him like she'd always meant to. That afternoon, the dog barked toward the ridge. Donna stood in the doorway, shielding her eyes. 2 riders passed in the distance, not town men, not travelers. Just shadows moving east. But she watched them until they disappeared behind the black trees. Later, while Red Bear sharpened a blade near the porch, she sat beside him and asked, "Did they give you a reason for leaving?" She nodded. "They follow the wind." "I don't." "And what do you follow?" He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Then, the sound of things that don't speak. She turned that over in her mind as the sun bled down the edge of the hills. The porch boards creaked as she shifted. "You don't ask for much," she said. "I listen." She faced him fully then, really looked at him. His face was lined but calm, his eyes unreadable but kind. There was strength in his stillness. She could feel it. Not the kind that swung fists or chased threats, but the kind that held when others fell. She found herself wanting to ask, "Why me? Why this cabin? Why stay?" But she didn't. Some things didn't need asking. Some things just were. That night, a storm rolled in, wind and sleet crashing like teeth against the shutters. The lantern flickered. Boughs whined and pressed against Donna's feet. The roof held, but barely. At midnight, they both rose, bundled in coats, and stood side by side patching the weak beams with tar cloth and prayer. Rain soaked her sleeves. Mud clung to her boots. But Red Bear's hand brushed hers once as they secured the last board, and her chest didn't feel so hollow anymore. The next morning, the world was quiet again. Sunlight caught in the puddles. The air smelled like pine and thawing earth. They sat on the porch together, not speaking. Boughs lay in the sun, tail thumping softly. Birds returned to the trees, warbling their indifferent songs. Donna looked at Red Bear. "You fixed my roof. And my gate. And my stubborn dog's limp." He smiled faintly. "I did not fix him. He lets me follow." She laughed, soft and surprised. And in that moment, something opened. A small door in her chest. Not flung wide, just cracked, like a shutter letting light back in. Later that day, the sheriff came. Alone this time. Hat in hand. Posture cautious. He stopped his horse at the bottom of the rise, didn't dare come up the path. "Just here to ask," he called, "if you're all right." "I am." "Town's still talking." "I figured." Sheriff Mather glanced at Red Bear, who stood a few paces behind Donna, arms folded, eyes calm. "You intend to stay?" he asked. "I do," Donna replied. Mather nodded slowly. "Then I hope your porch holds. Storms come fast these days." With that, he tipped his hat and rode back the way he came. Red Bear didn't move. Donna turned to him. "They'll come again." "I know." She looked toward the hills, where the trees swayed like they remembered every voice ever raised in anger. "I used to think peace meant being alone," she said. He said nothing. Just stood near. And that, she realized, was enough. That night, she set another plate at the table. But this time, she also set a second cup beside her own. Not as gesture. Not as habit. As invitation. Red Bear took his seat beside her. Outside, the wind passed softly across the fields. Inside, the fire burned steady, and two people sat shoulder to shoulder, not in words but in rhythm. And though no promises were spoken, Donna felt, deep in her chest, that something had already been kept. The sun rose pale and thin, casting a paper-yellow light across the ridge as if the world were holding its breath. Donna May stood by the window, her hand resting lightly on the sill, her eyes tracing the edge where forest met sky. Something was coming. She could feel it in her ribs, in the stiff ache of her old shoulder wound, in the way Boz growled softly even in his sleep. Red Bear had been quiet all morning. Not the kind of quiet that filled their days in comfort, but a watchful stillness. His movements were slower, more deliberate. He sharpened his blade and checked the rifle Donna hadn't touched in years. He didn't speak while doing it, but he didn't hide it either. Donna brewed coffee and poured 2 mugs. When she handed him his, their fingers brushed. "They'll come today, won't they?" she asked. He nodded once. Donna swallowed. "You think I should go?" Red Bear met her eyes, and in them she saw something deeper than caution, respect. "If you go, you'll be safe." She let the words hang there. "I'm not looking for safe," she said. "I'm looking for right." Outside, the wind shifted. Distant hooves thudded faintly through the cold earth. 6, maybe 7 riders. Maybe more. The air grew brittle enough to break. Donna stepped onto the porch. Her shawl wrapped snug over her shoulders. Her hair was tied back like her mother used to wear it on days she meant to fight without saying so. Boz padded out beside her, tense, tail high. Red Bear stood behind her, tall and steady, rifle slung but not raised. Down the path came the men. Sheriff Mather rode in front, his face grim. Behind him were 4 men she recognized from town, 2 merchants, 1 farmer, and the blacksmith's eldest son. But it was the man who rode beside Mather who made Donna's stomach tighten. Clayton Rook. He wore a preacher's collar now, but Donna remembered the boy he'd been, the same eyes, colder now. He held no rifle. Just a rope. That was worse. They stopped 10 yards from the porch. Mather raised his voice. "Miss Caldwell." "Sheriff." "We're here civil," he said, "but the town's had enough of this. They don't feel safe with a warrior holed up on your land. They say you've turned your home into a fortress." Donna smiled faintly. "You should see what a real fortress looks like." Rook stepped forward. His voice oiled the wind. "You've been warned, Donna. Time and again. This man is not your kind. You're inviting judgment. On yourself. On the town." Red Bear stood still. "I offered him shelter," Donna said calmly. "He earned his place. And I won't send him away just because small men are afraid of bigger shadows." Rook's jaw tightened. "Then you've chosen." "I have." The riders shifted, restless. Rook turned to the others. "Take her. Tie the Indian. We'll let the church sort what's left." Red Bear stepped forward, slowly. Not raising his weapon. Not threatening. But the movement alone caused panic. 1 man fired early. The crack split the air. Donna gasped as the bullet whizzed past, striking the porch post inches from her head. Boz barked furiously. Red Bear moved faster than the others could follow, grabbing Donna's arm and pulling her down just as another shot rang out. He fired once. Just once. The bullet struck the rifle from Rook's companion's hands, sending it clattering to the dirt. Red Bear didn't reload. He simply stood, tall and unyielding, his body between Donna and the guns. Sheriff Mather yelled, "Stand down." The men hesitated. Rook pulled his rope tighter. "Now," he snarled. But no one moved. Red Bear raised his voice, not loud, but sharp like a hawk's cry. "This woman gave shelter. Fed the hungry. Healed the land. She stood while you only whispered. If harm comes to her, it will mark your names in the earth forever. He turned to Donna then, and in the stillness between breaths, said softly, "Go inside." But she didn't. She stepped forward. "I won't hide," she said. "Not from cowards." Rook lunged from his horse, rope swinging. Red Bear moved to intercept, but it was Donna who stopped him. She struck first. The wooden ladle she'd been holding, forgotten until now, swung hard against Rook's jaw. He stumbled, not from force but from shock. Boz lunged next, teeth sinking into Rook's boot, dragging him to the dirt. Red Bear moved then, lifting Rook by the collar and throwing him back toward the other riders. He didn't draw a blade. He didn't touch his gun. He let the preacher crawl. And none of the men stopped him. Mather held up his hand. "That's enough." Silence dropped like ash. The riders stared at Donna, at Red Bear, at the old house behind them that had stood longer than their father's barns. And then, one by one, they turned their horses around. Even Rook, bloodied and silent now, mounted his mare and fled without a word. The men rode off. And Donna stayed standing. After they were gone, the wind picked up again. But this time it felt clean. Red Bear turned to her. "They may come again. I'll be here. You could have let me handle it." "I did." He smiled, not wide, not proud, but something quiet and real. She looked down at Boz, who panted happily at her feet, tail swishing. "Guess we all fight for home," she said. That night, she sat by the fire, the rope Rook had dropped curled on the floor like a dead snake. Red Bear carved another figure in silence. This time it was a woman, standing tall, arms outstretched, hair blowing like flame. Donna picked it up gently. "She's not pretty." "She's not meant to be," he said. "She's meant to be true." She nodded. Outside, the moon rose slow behind the hills. The porch post still bore the bullet scar. But the house stood. The garden slept. And the land, for the first time in years, felt like it remembered kindness. Donna rested her head back and exhaled. And in a voice low enough to be mistaken for thought, she whispered, "I used to think no one would ever stay. But you didn't ask to. You just did." Red Bear didn't answer. He only placed another log on the fire and stayed with her until the flames curled to ash, steady as dawn.